Okay, so today we're diving into this academic paper on Bitcoin. And most people, when they hear Bitcoin, they think volatile prices, right? Maybe buying a pizza with digital coins. But this paper, it goes way beyond that. We're talking about how Bitcoin could completely change international trade.
Yeah, it's interesting. What it does is it really digs into how Bitcoin's unique properties, they actually call it absolute property in this paper,
hmm
but how that could change the game for global commerce, you know?
So we're talking about how this absolute property thing works for people who are maybe not totally familiar with it, because I think most of our listeners, they kind of know the Bitcoin basics,
Right.
but we want to go deeper here.
And I think the best way to think about it is they compare Bitcoin to real assets, so things like gold or land. And what they argue is that Bitcoin, just like these tangible assets, it represents a form of ownership, but ownership that's totally separate from any other entity. It's not controlled by a bank. It's not controlled by a government. It's not even controlled by the person who created Bitcoin,
Oh,
right?
wow. See, that's a really radical idea when you actually stop and think about it, because everything in our current financial system, at least how we're used to it, revolves around these middlemen, these intermediaries for everything.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's all about these intermediaries. And this paper argues that Bitcoin cuts them out of the picture. You have this direct ownership, and it goes beyond borders.
It's like a direct line between individuals, no matter where they are in the world.
Exactly. It bypasses all those traditional gatekeepers. And they actually have this really powerful example in the paper. They talk about how women in Afghanistan are using Bitcoin. And for them, it's about achieving a level of financial independence that they just wouldn't have had before. They're able to get paid for their work. They're able to keep their money safe, even though they're in a country with very limited access to banks, to traditional banking.
Yeah, I remember reading that. It's a powerful example because it shows that this isn't just theoretical. This absolute property idea has real-world implications, especially for people who've been shut out or underserved by the current system.
Absolutely. And that's actually a perfect segue into the paper's criticism of the traditional financial system. They argue that how it's set up now, this dependence on trust and intermediaries, it's like trying to navigate a world where everyone speaks a different language.
Oh, wow. Okay, I can see where this is going.
Right. Just imagine trying to do business, trade goods and services in that world. It would be a nightmare. It would be slow, it would be inefficient, it would be expensive. And the paper argues that this is basically the reality of international trade today.
They actually compare it to a world with thousands of languages, where trade can only happen if you use one of the dominant ones.
Yeah. Which, let's be real, that's basically the role of the US dollar today.
Right. Like it or not, it's the language of global commerce.
Exactly. And just like having a single universal language would make things easier, the paper argues that a universal language of value could streamline global trade, make it accessible to everyone, more efficient. And they believe that Bitcoin could be that language.
It's a bold statement for sure. But when you look back at the history of money, I mean, we started with bartering, then commodity money like gold. Now we have fiat currencies, which, let's be honest, haven't exactly inspired confidence. So in a way, Bitcoin does feel like a natural progression, even a radical one. But there's one big thing that always comes up with Bitcoin, and this paper doesn't shy away from it: energy consumption. All the time, you hear critics saying Bitcoin mining is terrible for the environment, that it's unsustainable, uses too much energy. And you know what? They have a point. Mining Bitcoin does use a lot of electricity. But what I find fascinating is how this paper flips that criticism on its head.
Oh yeah, tell me more about that.
So they're saying, instead of seeing Bitcoin mining as inherently wasteful, we should view it as an opportunity, a way to utilize energy resources that would otherwise go untapped.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Think about all the remote areas in the world with massive renewable energy potential, places with tons of sun, wind, geothermal energy. These places might actually generate more power than they can use locally. And the problem is, transmitting that power to where it's needed can be really difficult, inefficient, and expensive. But here's the thing. Bitcoin miners, because they're always looking for the cheapest energy sources, they're incentivized to set up shop in these exact locations.
Interesting.
So they're actually driving the development of renewable energy infrastructure
Yeah,
in places that could really use it.
I never thought about it that way.
And they even have a specific example in the paper. They talk about a company in Finland that's using the excess heat generated from Bitcoin mining to heat homes in a nearby town.
Wow, that's incredible. So what's often seen as a downside of Bitcoin, this energy use, can actually be harnessed for positive real-world impact.
Exactly. It's about changing the perspective.
But, energy consumption aside, There's another common criticism about Bitcoin the paper gets into, and it's this whole question of scalability. Can the blockchain, the technology behind Bitcoin, can it really handle all the transactions if we're talking about using it for global trade?
Yeah, that's a great point. Because we always hear about these limitations with Bitcoin, like how it can be slow and the fees can be kind of high, especially for those smaller everyday purchases.
Right, and the paper acknowledges this. It's not shying away from that. But they put it in the context of what they call the blockchain trilemma, which
Hmm.
basically says you can optimize a blockchain for 2 out of 3 things. You have decentralization, security, and scalability. But you can't have it all, at least not at the base layer.
So it's about trade-offs, right? You have
Yeah.
to choose which features are most important.
Exactly, and with Bitcoin, it's all about decentralization and security. Those are non-negotiable.
So it's like the bedrock, the foundation has to be rock solid.
Exactly. Think of it like this. If Bitcoin is digital gold, then software, which they talk about in this paper, is like the security system protecting your vault.
Okay, yeah, I like that analogy.
So this software, it ensures the network stays secure. It's trustworthy. No one can just hack in and mess with things.
So software, it's kind of like the unsung hero of the whole system.
In a way, yeah. It guarantees the integrity of the blockchain and makes sure everything is tamper-proof. And that's what makes Bitcoin so reliable, especially for large-scale transactions, the kind that happen in international trade.
So just to clarify, we're saying Bitcoin's base layer, maybe not ideal for grabbing a coffee, but as a settlement layer for these huge trades, that's where it shines.
Exactly, you got it. And the best part is this actually encourages innovation at what they call the second layer.
Oh.
So you have things like the Lightning Network. These second layer solutions, they're designed to handle everyday transactions and make them fast and cheap.
So it's kind of like we use credit cards for daily purchases. But when it comes to big transfers, we rely on banks, different tools for different jobs.
I like how you put that, different tools for different jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is where Bitcoin's potential in international trade becomes super clear. In fact, the paper talks about using it for arbitration.
Oh, interesting. So you're talking about resolving disputes between companies from different countries.
Precisely. Because right now, that can be a nightmare.
Oh, tell me about it. Paperwork, intermediaries, legal fees. It's a mess.
Yeah, it's incredibly opaque and it can take forever. But the paper suggests that Bitcoin, with its transparent, tamper-proof ledger, could totally revolutionize how we handle these disputes.
Okay, how so?
Well, imagine smart contracts built on the blockchain. These contracts, they execute automatically. They release funds based on conditions that were agreed upon beforehand.
So it takes the human element and all those potential problems out of it.
Exactly. It's all automated and transparent. Let me give you an example. Let's say a coffee bean supplier in Brazil. They ship a container to a buyer over in Italy. With a smart contract, the payment to that supplier, it could automatically be released once the shipment reaches a certain port.
So there's no more waiting around for someone to process paperwork, no more wondering if the other party will actually hold up their end of the bargain.
Exactly. It eliminates the need for those intermediaries, reduces the risk of fraud or disputes, and it ensures everyone gets paid quickly and efficiently.
That sounds incredibly efficient.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's not even just about speed and cost. It's about trust, right? Because when you're dealing with businesses across borders, trust is essential, but often lacking.
Absolutely. And this goes back to the idea of Bitcoin as absolute property. Because you have direct control, direct ownership over your assets. You don't need to rely on trusting third parties as much. The blockchain itself becomes the trusted arbiter, ensuring fairness and transparency for everyone involved.
This is really making me rethink international trade as a whole. We're not just talking about Bitcoin as a digital currency anymore. We're talking about it as a potential foundation for a more efficient, more transparent, more equitable system of global commerce.
And that's a powerful idea.
It's amazing, isn't it? We started talking about Bitcoin as a currency, and now it's like this whole new way of looking at international trade.
Right. It really expands your thinking about what's possible.
It does. And this paper, it doesn't just stop at the technical stuff. It goes deeper. It's almost philosophical in a way.
Oh, absolutely. It challenges a lot of assumptions about how the world works.
Exactly. And one thing that really stood out to me, they talk about Bitcoin as this form of digital disobedience.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
It's like for decades, we've been told to put our trust in these big institutions, banks, governments, you name it. But Bitcoin says, nope, you can opt out.
It's about taking back control.
Exactly. It's like this paper is saying Bitcoin isn't just technology, it's a movement. It's about empowering individuals,
Yeah.
giving them a voice.
It's about shifting the balance of power.
Right. And it's wild. They even suggest this could have implications for global conflict.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point they make.
They argue that if you limit the ability of governments to, say, print money to fund wars,
And at the same time, empower individuals in conflict zones.
Bitcoin could actually contribute to a more peaceful world.
It's a bold claim, for sure.
It is, and I'm sure some people listening are thinking, come on, really?
Of course, and it's important to be critical. We can't just take these ideas at face value.
Right, we always encourage critical thinking.
But what I appreciate about this paper is that it's not afraid to ask the big questions.
It pushes the boundaries, It makes you think differently.
It does. And I think at the end of the day, the most important takeaway isn't about whether Bitcoin replaces the dollar, or even if it becomes this globally accepted currency.
It's bigger than that, isn't it?
It is. It's about recognizing that Bitcoin is already changing things.
It's creating a new paradigm.
Exactly. It's about individual empowerment, transparency, a fairer system.
And it challenges the traditional power structures in ways we're just starting to understand.
We're at the very beginning of something potentially huge.
Yeah, we are. So, to everyone listening, the next time you hear someone dismiss Bitcoin as just a speculative asset, remember this conversation. Remember that it's also a powerful technology with the potential to reshape our world. And who knows, maybe even make it a more peaceful one. That's it for this deep dive, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Keep those minds open, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.